So welcome everybody. We've made it to the last Inclusivity Community of Practice meeting of the year. I can't believe 2023 has already went by so quickly. Maybe you all are think about that, or maybe we're just trying to close out the year and think about 2024 after the holidays. But thank you for coming. I know this is the last stretch. And today, really happy that yesterday we were celebrating the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And to build on that celebration, we're going to be talking about how as peace builders, we can be doing more to promote the inclusion of persons with disabilities in peace building. And so today we're going to actually build on, we had an in-person meeting at the Networks Advisory Group meeting in late August that some of you were able to attend, where we had network members film, and we also had the Finnish Abilis organization, both who are actively working with persons with disabilities, either in peace building or humanitarian efforts. And so we started the discussion there, and we're going to be able to build on that more in this online meeting. And so today's meeting is going to flow with a panel, and then we will go out into breakout rooms to hear more about how you all are also advancing the inclusion of persons with disabilities in your work. And so that's going to be today's meeting, and we'll just kind of go with the flow in the conversation. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn us to our panel moderator, Tanzila Khan, who is the founder of Girly Things Pakistan. So, at which I believe she's there now. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it to her, who will introduce us to the panel.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Tanzila. I'm from Pakistan. I am the founder of girlythings.pk, which is a menstrual health care service here in Pakistan. And quite recently, I like to call it my child. I've had another baby that is my board game, which is also a game on disability. If you've played Monopoly, this is the Monopoly of accessibility. And I'm really excited for this entire discussion today that, as Jessica mentioned, yesterday was International Day of Disability. So we all are charged to have this conversation. We all are charged in being someone who is on the wheelchair. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists about everything that they're doing and how can we all support each other. So with this, I would like to turn to this amazing panel, which I am really excited to have a conversation with. We have Sylvain Obedi, who is the founder and executive director, Enable the Disabled Action. Then we have Brenda Kima, who is the Disability Inclusion Officer from Tangaza University. We have Yassine Farhed from Tunisia. He is the project manager of his organization, Atalaki. And we have Rele Bohele Lefojane, head of Disability Cluster, Southern African Youth Forum. And we would love to hear more from them about their profiles and also their expertise. So let's just start with something more generic. I would like to hear from all of you, probably from Sylvain first, that what have you been basically doing to promote the inclusion of persons with disabilities in your work?
Thank you so much. My work about disability inclusion, according to the piece, the work which I'm doing is to advocate, and I have some area where my advocacy is going. Firstly, I'm trying to have some advocacy on inclusive policy formulation. That means I'm advocating for inclusive policy formulation, and there I'm asking to the government official to assure that the young people with disability are actively involved in development and review of youth peace and security policies, because it's important for the policy efforts to explicitly recognize and to address the specific needs and the challenge faced by young persons with disability in conflict area. Secondly, I'm demanding to donor to allocate funds and resources to support programs that include youth with disability. That fund might be available to the initiative that provide accessible education, health care, and vocation training to empower youth with disability in conflict affected region. Another thing, we are giving advocating to have capacity building program which are focusing on disability awareness, accessibility, communication, and the removal of physical and attitudinal barrier. And apart from that, another area of the work on disability which we are doing it's on data collection and research. We are asking to the government and the youth rights advocates to work together and collect the data and conduct research on the experience and the needs of youth with disability in conflict zone. This data is more important than it's an evidence-based policy and program development. We are also in advocacy and awareness, uh, where we are engaging in advocacy efforts to realize the public awareness of the rights of and the challenge of the youth with disability uh, of uh, in context of of conflicts. And apart from that, the work also which we are doing is on monitoring and evaluation. So we are trying to take all to push all stockholds to put in practice robust monitoring and evaluation mechanisms to address the impact of policies and programs related to youth and to person with a disability. Yes.
Absolutely. I think all these areas they all work hand in hand, and I really liked what you pointed out about data, about challenges. I will come back to you shortly and ask you more about your challenges, because I'm sure all of us over here can run these programs, but there are common barriers that we all experience. I think I can just turn my question towards Yasin then. Yasin, can you just tell us a bit more about your inclusion practices? I think this question really helps us understand the scope of work our panelists do, and then we can dive into more specific questions as well. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, for everyone here who does not know the LAC organization, and just to be briefly here, we work on promoting religious freedom in Tunisia, and we work mainly with the religious leaders and just bringing religious leaders together and kind of members from different faith backgrounds, and to talk more about like interfaith dialogue and just promoting religious freedom. And this is just a brief about our organization. I've personally been involved a lot with the disability centers in Tunisia. We have a lot of disability centers, and what we have done with our organization is that we have done a lot of trainings and workshops for both the teachers, for the instructors in the centers, as well as the persons with disabilities, to be included more within the initiatives, like of civil society initiatives in general. Just how to include and how the persons with disabilities can be included within the civil society in the different initiatives that are there. And what we have seen is that most of the persons with disabilities is that they would like to be included, at least in the south of Tunisia, within the electoral system. Like they like to be included in elections and just to be there and just to watch. And we have seen a lot of that, especially in the south of Tunisia. We have seen a lot of inclusion in that as well. And then the major thing that we would like to, and this is still ongoing as well, is how to include persons with disabilities in our educational system. In Tunisia, there is a challenge, and we'll talk about more about this, is that fortunately, persons with disabilities are not included in our educational system, and now we are still advocating on this inclusion, and this is still an ongoing process. And since Atalaki organizations, Atalaki organization work a lot with religious leaders, what we have done as well is that we have talked a lot to religious leaders, and we have encouraged them to promote persons with disabilities rights, because if it comes from religious leader, at least in Tunisia, and I'm sure in a lot of spaces in the world, that has the people can trust the religious leaders. So I think we have encouraged a lot of the religious leaders to talk about the inclusion of persons with disabilities. So we have done a lot of work around that as well. So those are the three main things: trainings on civil society inclusion, as well as advocacy for educational inclusion as well. And we have worked as well with the religious leaders to include persons with disabilities within their frame of work as well.
I think that sounds amazing. And I would come back to you next to ask you more about some key points about how we can connect faith activism with disability. Because here in Pakistan, just to give you a little context, there are just two extreme ends of disability. One is like you're either God sent or you are a goddess, or you're just, too high on the pedestal. And sometimes people want my blessings. And I'm like, oh my God, like easy. But that's the perspective on disability. But on the other end, you're a curse. So there is no middle ground of disability.
Yeah.
And both of these perspectives come
Yeah.
from faith, which is pretty
Yeah.
false, because faith, as per my religion, Islam, is pretty much neutral, that you treat people with
Yeah.
disabilities like regular people, you give them rights, you punish them, if of course, if they're guilty, or if they need to have access to everything equally. So that's the perspective, but of course very different in different countries in terms of faith. We'll hear more from you on that. With this, I'd like to turn to Relibohil with the same question. If you could just highlight a bit of your initiatives towards disability.
Thank you so much. So, with our work in the Southern Africa Youth Forum, especially in the disability cluster, the main thing that I would like to highlight as very important is that the programs that we set in the disability cluster are the programs that the youth with disabilities themselves guide us on. We have an annual forum, SADC Youth Forum. We have it annually, and there we gather youth from the 16 SADC countries, where they come and we deliberate on issues that are affecting youth with disabilities and the ones that we think are very urgent. And from there on, we go and we implement. So I think that's a very inclusive approach, where we hear the voices of persons with disabilities and then we get to implement according to their guidance. And then secondly, we are very innovative in how we raise awareness. We use storytelling. And also we use pageants, beauty pageants. We just had the first ever Mr. and Miss Albinism SADC that was held in Zimbabwe, but through our partner organization. And also, because we are a regional organization, we work with national organizations in the SADC region. There we help to strengthen the voices that we make, so that we can be able to create a larger impact. Also trying to find how the organizations focusing on the same theme can be able to continue to learn together. You highlighted a very important issue on myths. So that's another issue that we looked into, especially myths and disinformation, how it affects persons with disabilities, especially in the digital world where we are in, and there's cyberbullying and issues like that. So in a nutshell, that's that. Thank you.
That's amazing. And I think I would like to come back to you and ask you some key points about creativity, innovation in telling stories about disability, because I think they're perceived either. The challenge with that is that they're mostly perceived in a more charitable, inspiring way, but they don't have to be inspiring. I think it's more about integrating in the society as regular citizens of the world. I think with this, I would like to go back to Farhad for now. Farhad, tell us a bit more about the challenges that you face, some key points about how do you connect faith activism with disability, and maybe some interesting story that you can share with us of something that happened. I think we all can relate to stories.
Yeah. Thank you. I think when it comes to the challenges that what we have seen in Tunisia, I think it's similar to Pakistan in some ways, as you were talking, is that first of all, we have the challenge starts with the parents. I think in Tunisia, that when we're talking about persons with disabilities, like for example, when we're trying to do whether in the centers or outside the centers, I think there's a lot of difficulties that come from the parents. That's why when we're talking about faith-based initiatives within the Peacebuilding, I think, and especially in our context, is that it is very important to connect to religious leaders. And I think because especially when we're talking in within like a smaller community in Tunisia. Because, for example, if we're working on a project or working within the centers, if the influence will be way better from a religious leader than from an organization or from me. So I think it's very important in the faith-based initiatives to include the religious leaders. I think they have a huge influence, whether we like it or not. Whether sometimes it's good, and as we know, sometimes it can be negative. But I think it's very important to include the religious leaders. They have influence within the region, and it's very easy for them to convince the parents. And I think what we have seen. And yes, there's, as you have said, like the curse and the blessing and all that. And I think it's very important as well. That's why we build and we raise awareness within the religious leaders as well. I think the second point, when it comes to faith-based initiatives, from my perspective and from what I'm seeing from what I have seen in Tunisia, is the faith-based initiatives plays a huge role in restoring the dignity of the person, the dignity of persons with disabilities, and the dignity of each category that are going through discrimination or going through hardships, at least here in Tunisia. And I think that is why I think faith plays a huge role in Tunisia. What we're seeing, they're restoring that dignity, and with the restoring that dignity, we go towards building hope. So I think that's why kind of faith here is very, very important, and our faith-based initiatives plays a huge role in restoring that dignity and then building hope in the future. And then the third point is that faith-based, I think the role is also faith-based initiative is to build resilient communities, which I think resilience is a kind of a meaningful word, and I think that's kind of what we're going towards, is that how we can build resilient communities, and that's how. And if we have those resilient communities, I think that inclusion comes kind of directly or automatically. So I think, and I think faith-based initiatives, the role of it plays a huge role in building the resilient communities. I did not prepare a story, so maybe you can go back to me later. I'll think, and then you can go back. I can give you a story.
Wonderful. I think I already have the takeaway from this panel for myself, which is inclusive societies are resilient societies. And I think that totally makes sense, that when it's like an organism, that when every organ is working, every part of the body is healthy, active, the body is healthy, it's functioning, it's ambitious, it's happy, it's motivated, and it is a bigger blessing for the society as well. So I think this totally makes sense to me, but everything said is easier than done. And with that, I would like to turn to Silvan to ask him that what is the challenge of disability inclusion in the broader scope of peacemaking? Because I know this for a fact, that even as someone with a disability, I know there's a lot of gap, there's a lot of space for development, but it's not that easy, especially in a conflicted area where already the society has not come around the idea of disability inclusion itself. If there's a humanitarian crisis of what's happening in the world right now, in Palestine as well, I am really far from what must be happening with people with disabilities over there, and what is their role in peace building as well. So let's turn to Silvan. Let's hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much for the speech. Really, it's we have more challenges. That it's true. But firstly, we have to know that as we are people with disability, we are not a homogeneous group, and many of us are young. But in general, what we are seeing is that disability movements push away young people with disability, and young people with disability don't include from young people. So at the moment, we do not have a disability group or disability causes who is also not recognizing by a peace mechanism or process. And I come from Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a country with complex crises with several local, national, and regional or even international peace process mechanisms. But no one of these mechanisms include person with disability, which means the voice and the needs of person with disability are not taken in count in the various decision arising from this mechanism. National plan for the implementation of UN Youth Agenda for Peace and Security have been and continue to be developed in some country. But it is regrettable to note that young people with disability continue to not be included in this process, and disability is not reflected in the document. It is there before essential to work with other stakeholders. And we all know that agency and countries mobilize to fund the youth effort in peace and in peace process. But how much of this funding goes to youth organization with disabilities? Several capacity building initiatives have been launched, but access to information remains one of the major barriers for young persons with disability to access to opportunities and resources to be included in the effort to build an inclusive and sustainable peace.
I understand. I think this is a long way to go, but another perspective on that is also that disability is not a secluded experience. It's actually a human experience, and everyone experiences disability in one way or the other. I mean, I always say that we experience disability as a baby. We were so dependent, we were in a stroller, perhaps we needed the same kind of ramps. We couldn't talk, we could not express, we could not understand the world, and we needed support. And even that, the same thing in old age. I think we're heading towards a world population that are going to be full of elderly people, and accessibility should become universal, and it should start with basic human rights. Because if communities have the atmosphere, a healthy atmosphere, it automatically stems out into more access towards the harmonious elements of society as well. So I think this is also one element that we can focus on to convince people in power that, look, just because, for example, if I would say, just because if I am on the wheelchair, don't do any favor to me. Tomorrow you'll be in the wheelchair, because we all have our abilities temporarily, so we have to think of the world. This is a tactic that I use, and I think in my part of the world it really works. Like they do put through whatever I'm asking for. I think I use fear, and if faith and fear sometimes go hand in hand. So with that, I'll hand over to Rele Bohel, because we're talking about stories and how do we document, how do we share. So please do tell us about your storytelling initiatives and your innovative ways, and maybe we can take some ideas and apply it in our regions as well. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. With regards to the storytelling, the strategy that we use, we allow the young people with disabilities to tell their own stories. They champion. So there's something that you said that it shouldn't always be about charity or feeling sorry. So we share success stories. We let the young people show off, their successes, in different areas where they're involved, or in different career paths. It can be in academics, in your career, in your talents. You tell your story, then we just record them. We do short recordings, then we show them. We share them on our media pages. Besides that as well, we also have webinars. We host webinars. On those webinars, we're just definitely talking about stories. We let the young people tell their success stories. And then another format that we use with regards to storytelling as well is still just we use their pictures. They just share their pictures. Mostly these are media or online campaigns. And then another, okay, maybe I'll just go a bit ahead of you. Another, like as I had said, that we just with an organization that is a member of our network. We just had the First Minister and Miss Albinism SADC. That's another way of the young people showing their talents, and also raising awareness to the larger public to say persons with disabilities are fully well able to do everything that any other person can do. We just need at times assistive technologies in order to be able to enhance that ability, or rather that inability. We just support it and we just enhance it. And also another thing, okay, I'll just, there are other key points that stood out as other people, as the colleague was talking. If you allow me, I'd just like to pick up a bit from what he said about lack of representation. As the strategy that we use as well in the SADC Youth Forum in the disability cluster, we led young persons with disabilities to be in key leadership areas. For example, in the SADC Youth Parliament, that we have young people with disabilities there, and through that it means they will be able to speak boldly and convince even the other people or policymakers to be able to hear and understand the needs of persons with disabilities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it completely makes sense. And I like what you said, that you put the group in power positions, and that has been one major game changer as well. I am curious about one thing, that in this entire journey, who has been your biggest ally? Which group or person do you identify to be your biggest ally, who listens and implements much more quickly? Like in my case, I think it has to be media. Like media, I think if we invite media to our platforms, they do come and they do report it. The only challenge that I face with media is that sometimes they report too dramatically, and that kind of kills the purpose. It has to be more authentic, more real. So we just have to tone that a little bit, but they always show up. So who has been your biggest ally?
I can say that in our case, okay, media also, it does really work. And you mentioned something about that at times it becomes like too extreme, or it's not reported in the way that it's meant to be reported. And in our case, as what we do, as we said, that we let the young people champion their own stories or tell their own stories. So we let them submit the story that they tell as it is, and then it is shared just in its original authenticity. So yeah, that's what I can say from my side.
For sure. Farhad, do you have any point? And then after that, we can also open the floor for some questions before we take the final words. Yes, Farhad?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest allies or in our work were the civil society organizations. Like I think even if their focus is not persons with disabilities, but I think we have talked a lot with a lot of civil society organizations, and we have convinced even a lot of organizations to, even within their field, they kind of work on persons with disabilities included in any field. So I think the civil society organizations in Tunisia have shown kind of a great has been like kind of a great ally for our work, as well as like for example, we're talking we have worked a bit not a lot, but for example with influencers as well, with on Facebook and Instagram, and they have been our biggest ally as well, especially for promoting inclusion for persons with disabilities. But the same thing for influencers can also be very dramatic. So when we're talking about this, and we haven't worked a lot with the media on this issue, but so I cannot really talk specifically about that. But what I would say is that our biggest ally has been the civil society organization presence in Tunisia.
Thank you very much. Salman?
Yeah, thank you so much. Even for me, firstly, it's also civil society organization are really much support on giving platform, but also UN agencies, because in my case I have been even more a space where I can speak about the work which I'm doing, bring and share the story of person with disability in my countries. And this had been helping much, and also some influence person who may be a personality who have more following their media social, they also support much the work, or to announce our voice, and this also is one of the
I think we've had some food for thought on the basic work being done and the challenges, and I think it gives us, especially me, some idea on similarities and common challenges that we all face. I would also like to open the floor for any questions that our audience might have for the panelists over here. Something that you're doing, it's not working out. I mean, working on disability, it's like working on a different planet. It is something that we're still exploring. We still have not fully defined disability. One could have a missing finger, they're also disabled. One could have an entire body paralyzed, they're also disabled. It is so nuanced. It's literally like being in a different galaxy, but a beautiful galaxy, because that is where the diversity comes from. And I have seen people with disabilities contribute brilliantly on platforms. I've seen that with my own eyes. So not just because I'm someone with a disability myself, I think I'm a believer of inclusion. Ibrahim, you have a question? I think we'll just take two questions and then we'll just go off towards our breakout sessions. But before that, I would love if the panelists can give one last remark, but let's just hold that for now and over to the question. Ibrahim, can we have your first question?
Maybe for me, it's not a question, but it's not experience sharing, a small experience sharing about what we are doing here in far north region of Cameroon. It is a zone affected by the crisis of Boko Haram since about 10 years now. But we are working especially with the blind people. The blind people are sometimes considered as the people who are helping the member of Boko Haram to carry the suicide bombing, to help the suicide bombing. But it was just a like a préjugé. We call it in French a préjugé. Sometimes they consider all these people as have a complicity with the member of Boko Haram. We start to work with the government people, and make an advocacy to help the government to consider the key role blind people can play to build a lasting peace of strategy. Yeah.
Caroline, can we please have your question and move towards the last comment?
Hi, I'm Caroline Walsh. I'm doing an MA at University of Winchester. I'm a physically disabled woman, a wheelchair user, and a master's student at University of Winchester. And I'm obviously really interested in this area because being physically disabled myself from birth, I just wondered if there were any role models out there internationally of physically disabled women or any other of actually leading peace building efforts, leading the way. And we've heard very much about disabled people working with or being worked, people building projects for disabled people. I just wondered if there were any trailblazers or any people actually in leadership roles in the peace building anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. I think we have like 3 trailblazers already over here in this panel, but I'm sure there are others as well. So if Yassine or anyone else would like to share with us, anyone that you know who are like leading in terms of peace building, who have a disability, or even if they don't, but they seem to have an expertise with disability, anyone you know, you can share it with us. But even if nobody comes to mind, I'm sure we have our own community where we can share. I think with this, I would like my panel to please share a few closing remarks, maybe one liner, one takeaway. I've already taken mine. I think I'm very hasty, very quick decision when it comes to shopping and picking my points from panels, but there are so many other options as well. So please share one liners and then we'll move towards our breakout sessions and I'll hand it over to Jessica. Who would like to share first? Maybe Yassine, would you like to share first?
Yeah, I think what is very important in terms of working with persons with disabilities is that what we have seen in Tunisia, I think for the last 20 years, is that people sometimes they think is that we're going to work for the people with disabilities, and we have seen a lot of advocacy campaigns that are doing it for the rights of persons with disabilities, but then the problem is that they're not including any of a person with disabilities. And I think that has been a huge problem in our country. And when we came, our organization said, no, there's an advocacy campaign. The person with disability will be leading that. It will have more power. It will have more influence. So I think it's very, very important for us in our work is that to kind of let the person with disabilities leading, and especially if we're talking about advocacy campaign, and especially building person with disabilities who are leaders that can do this. And I think, and that's how we turn from working for to working with, even in bigger advocacy campaigns. So I think that is something very important, and we should always keep that in mind, because it's easy for us. We're talking about inclusion, or we're talking about communities. It's easy for us to forget persons with disabilities, to forget women, and to forget all the minor, all the discrimination can easily happen. So I think it's very important for us from the start, kind of bring out leaders and work with persons with disabilities, and themselves even leading bigger advocacy campaigns.
Superb. I can't agree more. Of course, letting people with disabilities lead actually leads to amazing levels of inclusion, and it trickles down. So can't agree more. Selvan?
Okay. So I don't know if I start answering for the question or give my.
We're asking for a closing liner from you of this panel. Any takeaway for the audience? One liner.
Okay. So for me, I agree with what colleague was saying, but for one line which I can say, it's to call everyone to promote the universal design, because once we are thinking about intersectionality in everything what we are doing, we are all benefit from that. You may be person with disability or without disability. When we are making sure to use universal design, we take benefit ourselves, everyone, because even some examples. So now we are using elevator, and for the story, elevator was created to facilitate the movement for person with disability to not use the stage. But now everyone is benefiting from elevator. Everyone is using elevator, and I think universal design is one of the way to arrive to this inclusion, and each one should fight for that. Thank you.
I totally agree with you. And I think I just recalled that everyone wants to use the accessible bathroom as well. That's why it's always taken. And I'm sure my wheelchair buddies would agree on that. But anyways, Raleigh, can we have the last closing note from you?
Yes, for me, really, what's in my heart is to continue to promote, or rather to support, the right of access to information and communication for persons with disabilities. That is very, 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 very important because without, information, we even missing out on opportunities that could be there to continue to enhance the lives of persons with disabilities. For example, even in a time of conflict, when there is not access to information, even fleeing, could be a problem, because if you know of the information, it gives you a go ahead, or rather, it gives you an advantage in order to be able to come up with ways in which one can be able to protect themselves where possible. Our world is becoming more and more digital, and it means that persons with disabilities should not be left behind in continuing to access information and communication. And for example, even when we have webinars and things like that, sign language interpretation could also be worth it, even though the challenge is still that it is unique per country at times. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. This conversation was very short, brief, and full of different ideas. And I'm sure, I'm getting a lot of ideas to immediately apply. For example, I would love to have a scanning of the mosques in Lahore on how much accessible are they, and what is the conversation that's happening when people with disabilities go to these mosques. And my last two pens on the subject would be that there are two things that one can focus on. One is either the accessibility of any opportunity or the information of inaccessibility. I think equally both of these parts really help and cater to each other. Thank you so much, everybody, and I wish you all best of luck. Please reach out to me for any support, any help, and of course our panelists, trailblazers, are also out there on social media. Over to Jessica.
Thank you, Tanzila, for your great moderation and wonderful questions. So now we're going to transition into our breakout rooms. In the breakout room, you will have a facilitator and a note taker. And you're going to be looking at two different questions, which I will put in the chat, which is around what areas of opportunities do you see in advancing the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the faith and Indigenous peace-building spaces? And then the second question is, or what challenges are you facing in this engagement? So I'll put this in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and open up all the breakout rooms to see you in the room. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you are having fruitful discussions. I know ours went a little short for our group, but happy to hear what some of the conversations were. So I will turn it for a brief readout from group one. Tris.
Thanks, Jessica. I think our group had really interesting conversations. We focused on the first question we focused on were identifying challenges and having to engage with persons with disabilities within peace building work. And a common theme within addressing that question was that different cultures kind of address disability differently. So we kind of identified the idea of shame within the family as in one challenge that engaging with persons with disabilities have, because most of the time, with the idea of shame, parents are more hesitant to enroll their child who has disabilities in programs or initiatives. So to kind of identify, Yassine mentioned that engaging with religion and religious leaders within the community to kind of demystify the idea of shame, so parents have more of an open-minded opportunity to send their kid to disability programs and such. So that was one of the main challenges that we identified. And then areas of opportunities we see in advancing inclusion with persons with disabilities is that to celebrate the progress that has been made, because in the past has been shared that disabilities wasn't incorporated at all. So it's now there's more of a conversation, so that the conversation is the opportunity. And then also identifying groups with disabilities and working with organizations that specialize with disabilities to form workshops and trainings, not just for people with disabilities, but also instructors to see how they can be more effective in their advocacy efforts for people with disabilities. So those were the opportunities that were shared. Thanks.
Thanks, Tris. Group two, Marian and Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. So I think similarly to room one, we also talked quite a bit about challenges. But one really fun thing that came out of our room was that almost everybody, to every challenge that was suggested, there was a solution or multiple suggestions as ways to address those challenges, which was really encouraging. So similarly to Tris, I'll start with the challenges and then move to the opportunities. So many of the challenges that were mentioned were highlighted in the main group, but then also with Tris's as well. So the lack of inclusion in key decision areas, so, including representation in key decision-making areas, if you're with us and about us. Another challenge was that the need concrete data on the number of disabled persons within an organ or within the country, because if you go to the government about the needs of your population, having accurate data on how large that population is only that much more useful to get your point across and to get your needs met. Of course, physical access for those in wheelchairs. So of course, modifying buildings and houses and making that compulsory so that there's access to everyone. We talked about elevators in the main group, but building resilience and fund initiatives that will promote people with disabilities. Of course, funding is always an issue. And then lack of recognition in the diversity of populations, which was a really interesting point that was brought up about the homogeneous treatment of during humanitarian crisis, as everyone is treated as if they're all on the same needs level, which doesn't take into account those with special needs and those who need extra assistance, as was mentioned in the main group about more information needed so that folks who need a little bit longer to get to flee a situation can actually have that time. But really, within that humanitarian crisis, being treated as somebody with a special need rather than just a homogenous group. We also spoke on stigma and how society treats people with disabilities as second-class citizens, and then communication barriers. So having a lack of adequate communication resources, specifically with sign language. There were multiple examples that were brought up within our group. So those are some of the key challenges that we discussed and solutions that were brought to it. As for opportunities, one major one was advocating for inclusive policies. Again, the solution was have more people with disabilities in the conversation, in the decision-making practices, and in those spaces, in those rooms. Another one was research led by people with disabilities. So the policies that are in place, if they do exist, they're not bearing fruit, was the phrase that was used. For example, barriers in hospitals with medical professionals. So for instance, building on those existing policies to ensure that they're actually working for the people with disabilities. And then, of course, strong advocacy for policies that protect those with disabilities, access to infrastructure, equal employment, skills training. So those were our opportunities and challenges. And then, Miriam, if I missed anything, please go ahead and jump in.
Yes, Sarah, you did a good job. Yeah, basically, that's all. And I don't know if you mentioned the last point Patrick made, that lack of adequate tools and resources to has been the problem to ensure effective communication in terms of sign language communication. Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah and Marian, for your readout. I'll just do a quick readout from our group 3, our last group. So in building on both what Tris and Sarah said, we talked about similar things about the need to not look at persons with disabilities as a homogeneous group in thinking about how do we unpack the intersectional aspects of barriers and needs. So thinking about the difference of socioeconomic opportunities of people wanting to participate and lead, but maybe not having the funds to do so in that way, or the access and the environment for them to participate and lead in that space. We were talking about how there are a lot of top-down approaches. We have our UN Security Council resolution now, but there are still missing bottom-up approaches that clearly we all have our work cut out for us to do. And thinking about the current activities that we do, such as restorative justice activities and other things that we are doing in our work, what is it that we should be doing to make sure that people with disabilities feel that they see themselves in the work, that they're able to show up in the work and lead in that work? So what is it that we're missing in the peace building sector from these bottom up approaches that's not letting these areas manifest? And maybe that's, there's other things that can be helpful, such as the implementation of laws and policies. But I think in building on this meeting and in this space, it's thinking about, I always go back to this quote that I've heard this year, and now I think it's going to resonate with me for years, which is, if there cannot be peace at home, right? If there are not opportunities for you to maybe lead from your home, or even be able to lead from your home in that matter, how can you be able to lead and participate in your community? How can you see yourself as a leader if you don't feel that in your own home? And I think that resonates across so many intersectional identity groups this year. And I think we need to rethink about how people have best practices and lessons learned in other sectors that we can take to the peace building space. So the humanitarian space, for example, was mentioned earlier, and it's a lot easier to see some examples from that because it is more about the emergency situation of needs, and whether they're doing it great or not, there are things that we should be taking from that space because the humanitarian and peace building spaces are so linked together. And the same can be said about even the educational spaces that we've been talking about today. I'm sad that Brenda wasn't able to join us from Tangaza, but she's done a fantastic job of actually engaging persons with disabilities and bringing that specific leadership component to the university and translating that into other spaces. And so I think it's that intentionality that we all have to be thinking about, but it's the good news is in terms of some of the other challenges that we've heard around opportunities for leadership, opportunities for funding. The network's actually going to be hiring a consultant next year to be doing that exactly for us. So in thinking about the intersection of faith plays a really strong role in being a bridge builder between working with persons with disabilities and disability organizations, but also the peace building space. They do a good job of being able to do a whole of society approach. So we want to unpack the 100+ network membership space in all of the work that we're doing, and also our supporters to be able to map what people are actually doing and what the gaps are and where's the direction that we should be going in this space. And so there will be a call for applications for that position in the next year to be able to start unpacking that work and really starting to do the bottom-up approach of what needs to be done. And we're really looking for and going to be reaching out to other disability-focused organizations because we really do want a person with disability to actually lead that work. So that we can really start continuing to build out the leadership area, and also making sure that we show that there's a connection of, if you're active in this space, if you see yourself in this space, the whole space will be transformed, right? And so really looking forward to that. Another piece of news for those who stayed with us throughout this meeting, 2023, like I said, went really quick. And I'm really glad that I had the help of our 2023 steering committee, which I see that Marian and Sanat were both here with me today. So we're going to be listing the call for applications for 2024. So I will put that, the form in the chat if you are interested in being part of the 2024 steering committee next year. And I'm sure our steering committee members can tell you about it, but it's really just helping to really shape next year's meeting. So we'll be putting, as a follow-up, we'll be sending out a recording of this event, as well as the form that you can sign up if you're interested in that. So really glad that we had this meeting today and we were able to build on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. That was yesterday. Thank you all so much. And we'll be in touch.